What you're about to hear has never been fully explained. Three men, a remote lighthouse off the coast of Scotland, and a mystery that has haunted investigators for over 125 years. No bodies were ever found. No definitive answers were ever given. This is their story.
December 26, 1900. A ship called the Hesperus cuts through the bitter North Atlantic toward a small, desolate island off the coast of Scotland. On board is a man named Joseph Mòr, a relief lighthouse keeper making a routine visit to deliver supplies and swap shifts with the three men stationed on Eilean Mòr, the largest of the Flannan Isles. It should have been an ordinary day. It was not. As the Hesperus drew close to the island, the crew raised a flag to signal their arrival. No response. They sounded the horn. Still nothing. They fired a rocket into the sky. Silence. Mòr climbed ashore alone and scaled 160 steep stone steps up to the lighthouse. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The lighthouse was empty. The beds were unmade. The clock on the kitchen wall had stopped. The table was set for a meal that had never been eaten, and a single chair had been knocked over, as if someone had left in a sudden, terrible hurry. Three men, experienced, professional lighthouse keepers, had simply vanished. No bodies, no note, no explanation, and more than 125 years later, we still don't know what happened to them. To understand this mystery, you first need to understand where it happened. The Flannan Isles are a small cluster of rocky outcrops sitting roughly 20 miles west of the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. They are wild, remote, and unforgiving, battered by North Atlantic storms for most of the year. The locals called them the Seven Hunters. For centuries, the islands had a strange reputation. Shepherds would bring sheep to graze there but refused, absolutely refused, to stay on the islands after dark. They spoke of ghosts, of phantoms, of a darkness that settled over Eilean Mòr that no lantern could lift. Whether you believe in such things or not, what's undeniable is this. It was the kind of place where the edges of the world felt very, very close. The lighthouse itself had only been built in 1899, just 1 year before the disappearance. It was a modern structure, sturdy and well-equipped, designed to guide ships safely through some of the most treacherous waters in Britain. It took three men to run it. James Ducat was the principal keeper, the most experienced of the three. He had spent decades working lighthouses across Scotland, calm, methodical, dependable, the kind of man you trusted with your life. Thomas Marshall was the second assistant, younger but experienced enough. He kept meticulous records and took his duties seriously. And then there was Donald McArthur, an occasional keeper, filling in for the regular first assistant who was on sick leave. By most accounts, McArthur was a big, rough man, quick-tempered, not someone easily rattled. Three very different men confined together on a rock in the middle of the ocean. That detail will matter later. Their last confirmed day of normal activity was December 13th, 1900. The lighthouse log shows routine entries, weather readings, barometer levels, the time the light was lit and extinguished, everything in order. On the morning of December 15th, final notes were made on a slate, barometer and thermometer readings, wind observations at 9 a.m., with the intention of copying them into the log later. They never got the chance. The first sign that something was wrong came that same night, December 15th, when a passing steamship called the Archtor noticed that the lighthouse on Eilean Mòr was dark. A lighthouse, in the middle of a storm. Dark. The captain noted it and planned to report it when they docked in Leith, Scotland. But the Archtor ran aground in the Firth of Forth and the report was delayed. By the time the Northern Lighthouse Board was alerted, 11 days had passed. 11 days of silence from Eilean Mòr. The Hesperus was dispatched immediately, and so Joseph Mòr found himself climbing those 160 steps on Boxing Day, pushing open a door that should never have been unlocked in the first place. Inside, he found the kitchen almost clean, dishes washed, surfaces cleared. But the table was set for a meal. Food sat untouched. The fire had not been lit in days, and the cold had seeped into every corner of the building. The clock on the wall had stopped. No one had wound it. 2 sets of oilskins, the waterproof coats the men wore in rough weather, were hanging on their hooks. Only 1 set was missing. Mòr returned to the Hesperus, shaken. Captain Harvey sent 2 more sailors ashore for a closer look. They searched every room. They searched the surrounding cliffs and landing areas. Nothing. Captain Harvey sent a telegram to the mainland. It read simply, "Dreadful accident at Flannan's." The superintendent of the Northern Lighthouse Board, Robert Muirhead, arrived to investigate in January 1901. What he found, or rather what he didn't find, deepened the mystery considerably. At the western landing of the island, there were signs of significant storm damage. Iron railings had been bent. A large metal box that stored ropes and mooring equipment, bolted high into the cliff face, had been ripped from its fixings and tossed aside. A set of stone steps carved into the rock had been damaged. The sea had clearly struck the western landing with extraordinary force. Muirhead's conclusion was this. At some point in the afternoon of December 15th, after the morning's log entries were made, all 3 men had gone to the western landing, perhaps to check on the equipment or secure the mooring ropes, and had been swept into the sea by an enormous rogue wave. It was tragic, it was plausible, but it didn't answer everything. Why were 2 sets of oilskins still inside? If the men were heading to the cliffs in a storm, why would any of them go without their waterproofs? And why was a chair knocked over inside the lighthouse? Experienced keepers didn't leave chairs knocked over, and there was one other detail that refused to sit quietly. A canary, in a cage, in the kitchen, still alive. If the men had been gone for 11 days, who had been feeding it? Over the decades since that Boxing Day discovery, theories have accumulated like sediment around the Flannan Isles mystery. Some are rational, some are not. Let's start with the darkest ones first. Suspicion fell, in some quarters, on Donald McArthur. Remember, he was the man with the temper, isolated on a rock for weeks with 2 other men in the depths of a Scottish winter, with storms battering the walls day and night. One theory suggests that McArthur snapped, that he fought with the other 2 men, perhaps on the western landing, and that all 3 went into the sea in the struggle. Another version has McArthur killing Ducat and Marshall deliberately, throwing their bodies into the ocean, and then taking his own life the same way. There is no evidence for any of this, no signs of a struggle inside the lighthouse. Nothing in the surviving records to suggest serious conflict between the men. It remains speculation, disturbing, but without foundation. Then there were the wilder theories, sea serpents, ghost ships, foreign spies, even alien abduction. The remote, otherworldly nature of the Flannan Isles made people reach for the supernatural when logic failed them. And then there is the logbook. In the years after the disappearance, a supposed logbook surfaced, containing entries from December 12th through the 15th. In these entries, Marshall reportedly described a storm unlike anything he had ever witnessed. Ducat was described as unusually quiet. McArthur, the big rough man not known for sentiment, was apparently weeping. All 3 men, the entries said, had been praying together. The final entry supposedly read, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." It's a remarkable document, haunting, cinematic. It's also almost certainly fake. Investigators have found no evidence these entries were ever made. The official logs show nothing unusual in the days leading up to the disappearance. Historians now believe the dramatic logbook was fabricated, possibly inspired by a 1912 poem about the mystery by Wilfred Wilson Gibson, which romanticized the story considerably. The truth, as it so often is, appears to be both simpler and more terrible than legend. Here is what the evidence actually points to. On the afternoon of December 15, 1900, the three lighthouse keepers left the lighthouse together. The morning's work was done. The light had been extinguished at its proper time. The slate entries had been made. Something drew them outside, likely the storm damage at the western landing, the mooring equipment, the ropes, the bent railings. These were their responsibilities, and they were conscientious men. One of them went without his oilskin. Perhaps the errand seemed brief, perhaps the weather appeared to have momentarily eased. And then the Atlantic, without warning, sent a wall of water up the cliff face, a rogue wave. In those waters, in those conditions, a single unexpected wave could rise 40, 50, 60 feet. Experienced sailors drowned in seas like that. Three men standing on an exposed rock landing had no chance. In seconds, the ocean took them, and the ocean kept them. No bodies were ever recovered. They never would be. James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, Donald McArthur. Three men doing their jobs on a remote rock in the North Atlantic. Three men who went to check on a landing stage one December afternoon and never came back. The lighthouse at Eilean Mòr was automated in 1971. It no longer needs keepers. It stands there still, its light turning through the long Scottish nights, watched by no one. The families of the three men never received definitive answers. The investigation concluded. The official report was filed, and the Flannan Isles settled back into their fog and their silence. But the questions never went away. What really drew all three men outside at the same time? Why was one man without his oilskin? What knocked that chair over? And perhaps most unsettling of all, who fed the canary? That's the Flannan Isles mystery, one of the strangest, most enduring vanishing acts in recorded history, and one that more than a century later has never truly been solved. If this case kept you up at night, you're in the right place. Subscribe to Terrifying Cases. New files opened every week. The truth is out there. We just have to find it.